Replay PCs.
Hello and welcome back to the channel. And today I've got something a little bit different. It's probably also a bit weird and geeky, but that's okay since we're all retro geeks here anyway, right? So it's all good. About 6 to 8 months ago, I decided to build myself a new full-height tower. It's a 586, and it sits under the desk alongside my Pentium 200 MMX. Unfortunately, I can't show you because it's tucked away in the corner there behind my monitor, but they both run through a KVM switch, so they're sharing the same keyboard, monitor, and mouse. They've also got sound cards with the audio going into that, so I suppose it's a KVM-A switch. It's quite nice because it auto-senses whichever machine gets turned on, or if I'm using both, I can manually switch between them. Most importantly, those machines also have MIDI output, both going up into my stack of modules that you can see on the shelf behind me. If you remember from my previous video on connecting up sound modules, I've got a nice little 4-in, 6-out MIDI interface and patch bay, so I've got the flexibility that I need for this setup. So once I had all this connected, I got to thinking, wouldn't it be cool if I could have both machines playing the same game, with one of them playing through the MT32 and one of them through the SC55. Again, if you remember from that previous video, those two modules don't have the same MIDI implementation, so you can't use one machine playing through both of them at the same time in a daisy chaining or MIDI through type setup. You have to do this with two machines. Also, obviously I'm not talking about playing the game through on both machines, it's really just for the intro music. And it's important also to note that this is not just about hearing the MT32 and the SC55 together, because if I wanted to do that, I could just record the soundtracks separately and mix them together. No, this is a challenge, and it's about how can I synchronize these two machines to be playing the game at the same time when I'm using a KVM switch. So I'm not using a keyboard with a Y cable going to both machines, so I can start the game by hitting enter, send that same signal to both machines at the same time. So this really comes down to an issue of scheduling. To further complicate matters though, I wanted to do it in pure DOS. That means no third-party utilities, no resource kit utilities, not in Windows. So it comes down to how can I schedule something based on time in pure DOS with batch scripting. Now there are various methods that you could probably achieve the synchronization of two games, but I'm not talking about manual methods. I didn't want to have to switch between them and then watch the clock and hit enter at the right time with delays in a batch file and that sort of thing. I wanted something that was reproducible, that I could start it running and come back in 20 minutes and then it would start if I wanted to do that. Bit of a challenge, but you might start to spot some problems. Firstly, even if I could come up with a way of synchronizing them and starting the game at exactly the same time, we've got two very different specification machines here. One's a 586, one's a Pentium 200 MMX. They've got different architectures. One's got a VLB, the other a PCI video card. They've got different hard drives with different access speeds and so on. So even if I could start the game simultaneously on both machines, would they start up at the same rate? So to test this, I got my cheap video capture device and recorded both of them starting up individually. I used a batch file to start it so that I could see when the command was sent, so that I could use that as a consistent cue point for synchronizing them. And unfortunately, as you can see, they didn't seem to be in sync, but strangely enough, as time went on, they did come back into sync. So I decided it was probably because of the cheap video capture device and probably just a bit of video lag. Don't worry about it. But another issue is in terms of accuracy of setting the PC clock. Again, I'm using no third-party utilities, it's in pure DOS, I can't synchronize to a time server. So the best that I can do is a manual method of watching the clock. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, enter. Now that's not going to be terribly accurate, and unfortunately checking the accuracy is subject to the same human limitations. But with this, again, I decided, well, I'm probably always going to be slightly early or slightly late. What matters more is how consistent I am between the two machines. It's not so much that they are both set to the same exact time, it's more about the difference between them. And I thought that's probably only going to be about 50 to 100 milliseconds. In terms of the audio tracks, that's going to just show up as a very slight echo or a delay. It's going to sound like a nice pleasing effect, if anything, as opposed to sounding completely out of sync. So how about the method of actually doing task scheduling in DOS? When I first started thinking about this problem, my mind immediately went towards getting the time into an environment variable and comparing that to a fixed string in a batch file and doing some sort of loop. Now, unfortunately, in DOS, the time command always prompts for a new time to be entered. There's no way of just displaying the time. So that made it really difficult. In current versions of the command interpreter in Windows, you can do a time/t, which will print out the time, and you've also got things like for/f. In pure DOS, you don't have that. I did find one method online, or tweaked a few different ideas that I found for getting the time into an environment variable and being able to compare, but it required creating a heap of temporary files all the time, and it was very, very slow and also inaccurate. So I left it for quite a while, and I'm happy to say that recently I had another crack at it and found a method. So the trick lies in the fact that echo dot will basically do a carriage return. Echo dot prints out a blank line. We can pipe that output to the time command, and what happens is that now the time command gets that input of an enter or carriage return, so it does effectively just display the time. Then the next breakthrough is we can pipe that output into find, and there we go. We can actually do finding a particular time. So from this, it's really quite easy to put it into a loop in a batch file and create a utility like this. I called it waitfor.bat. You can call this from another batch file. So then I just created another batch file that also takes the time as a parameter and calls waitfor.bat and then runs whatever I want it to run, in this case Prince of Persia 2. Now, unfortunately, during my testing, I noticed something weird. The PC clock was basically running slower. And I thought, oh no, there must be a slight delay caused by that echo dot piped to the time command, and it's causing the PC clock to slow down. Well, I did more testing, set a lengthy delay, and called waitfor.bat, and then checked the time, and no, it wasn't that at all. It turned out to be Prince of Persia 2. Now, that's a game that I actually use as part of my testing, doing a build and final testing before it goes out the door, because I noticed that quite often if there's any sort of hardware problem or configuration issue, it can be shown up with Prince of Persia 2. I don't know whether that's because it's highly demanding or poorly written, but I'm leaning more towards poorly written now, since it is causing the time to run slower on both PCs. So I thought, okay, I won't use that, I'll use a different game. Now, you might also have seen another issue. If you know anything about the MT32, you'll know that most games send custom sounds to it on startup, which actually makes the game load a bit slower. Added complication there. So I could try to choose a game that doesn't send custom sounds to the MT32, but I couldn't actually think of one that supports the MT32 and General MIDI. If you can think of one, leave something in the comments. So I decided to use Leisure Suit Larry 6, and I thought, well, I'm going to need to assess the timing difference in starting up the game. How much longer does it take to initialize the MT32? So I did the same trick using the video capture device. Using that, I could synchronize the start and then identify consistent points when the game actually starts, and we see the Sierra logo start to appear, for example, and look at the time difference. By counting frames and timing and so on, I came out with about 12 seconds. But unfortunately, then there was an issue that the timing kind of fell out of sync between the two, notably around the point of the gunshot sound. The MT32 gunshot sound is a bit longer, and so it seems that Sierra have actually allowed for that in the timing of the intro sequence. So around this time I thought, this is just a doomed exercise, I may as well forget it now. But I thought, no, let's give Prince of Persia 2 another try. It only really matters for subsequent runs. If I need to test it again, just in between I'm going to have to reset the PC clock. That's not too bad. So I went to Prince of Persia 2, And I also did the same timing test with the video capture device, and again it came out to about 12 seconds. So I basically called the my start@.bat with a time on the MT32 machine and then a time that was set 12 seconds later on the other machine, and it actually didn't work too badly. I could hear quite a delay between the two. I thought, well, it sounds like about a second, we'll experiment with that, change the time gap to 11 seconds, and unfortunately that was too much. So I thought, well, maybe about 11.5 seconds. Now, here's an issue. Because I'm using the loop in the batch file and the find command, I was happy to go to second accuracy, but not really millisecond accuracy. If there's a delay here and it's not accurate enough, if I'm trying to have a time of 0.5 seconds, well, that's really only a 100 millisecond window between 0.50 and 0.59 before it becomes 0.6. And if I don't have that level of accuracy, I could end up just getting stuck in a loop and the game just won't start. So instead, I decided to handle this by setting the time instead of to the second to the half second. And again, subject to the same lag in watching the clock, decided it should be accurate enough. And you know what? It worked! And here we have how it sounds with the MT32 and the SC55 using approximately an 11.5 second delay between the startup of the two batch files.
In ancient Persia, there lived a sultan who had an only daughter, whose beauty was like moonrise in a clear heaven. Now it happened that the sultan left his kingdom to fight in a foreign land. In his absence, the princess fell in love with a young traveler who climbed the palace wall to see her. This did not please the Sultan's Grand Vizier Jafar, who meant to marry the princess himself. Seizing power, Jafar had his rival thrown into the dungeons, but the young man escaped and struck down the evil magician.
So there you go. It turns out my little challenge is actually possible. You can start a program at a specific time with DOS batch files. For a long time, my friends and I thought that it just wouldn't be possible. We were also doubting my sanity, but I had a lot of fun. It was very interesting, and I had fun making this video too. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, bye for now.